All right, so we've done the first little bit, I think, to explore this area of retirement, asking some fairly big questions. Kind of, what does this retirement space entail for the individual? What should we be thinking about? What are the risks involved? What should we be considering? Decisions around preparing for this. And again, as I said, that the idea of getting advice, I think, becomes more and more important just because the space that we occupy now when we're retired is so complex. There's so many things out there. You really do want to get some help. So let's move the conversation a little bit further now and start to unpack what this space might mean, both financial and non-financial. And to help us sort of go beyond the numbers, understanding the realities of your retirement decision, it's my great pleasure to welcome two people. One, the Head of Research and Product Development at Alexander Forbes, John Anderson, and he'll be joined by Anne Cabot-Alletzhauser, who's the Head of the Research Institute at Alexander Forbes. So warm welcome to them as they take us through this.
The Hulk. Oh, he's green, you get stuff done. Finding a balance and finding a way to enjoy life. Apple. I've got a 1-year-old at the moment, so now I'm a morning person. Now and then a little bit of heavy metal. Magic, dragons, fantasy, that kind of thing. Changing the industry, so that makes me want to get up and do it again the next day. I've been asked to just have a look at the realities of your retirement decision. We also thought it would be really great to take the opportunity, and it's my privilege to introduce Anne Cabot, who's been around in the industry for many, many years. She heads up our research.
Many, one's enough.
And it's really going to be a team effort. We're going to share with you a lot of the research insights, and she can also share with you some of her experience and really what it means. So I'm going to start off by having a look at what are the objectives in retirement. And you need to, as you're sitting over here, think to yourself, what is my objective? And it doesn't really matter how old you are. I also need to do this, even though retirement for me, now that I have a son, is probably 50 years away. But I need to also think about this. So is it about family holidays? Is that your objective? Is it about leaving money for family? Certainty of monthly income? Could it be capital preservation, maximizing the return from investment, which many people think that is the objective, but you'll soon see that isn't the objective. You actually have to have a well-balanced plan to meet multiple objectives. Could it be golf for the guys out there that really like golf, or for the ladies in the audience, maybe a spa, doing various things in retirement? The reality is it's different for each person. Your retirement will be different. Your objective is different. At the end of the day, you will probably have multiple objectives that you're going to have to balance. The way we like to look at things really is the ultimate objective is actually to have a fulfilling retirement. And that is very different from having lots of money. As you'll see now, just now when Anne starts talking, having more money doesn't really mean a great retirement. It actually, you need to look at wider things. So what does this issue of a fulfilling or happy retirement encompass? It really encompasses two specific pillars. And often we only focus on the left-hand side, which is the financial factors. But very often, because we're all human, there are many non-financial factors that impact having a fulfilling retirement as well. I'm going to take us through a lot of the financial factors, but I'd like Anne to really take us through some of the other issues to consider that are money related, but do ultimately also impact, it's around money, psychology, and how it affects the financial factors. So I'll hand over to Anne.
Okay. Well, thanks, John. In case you don't know, John and I are kind of the yin and the yang of research. He's the yin, youth, and I'm the yeehaw. So you're going to get the yeehaw now. You'll notice that there wasn't a video of me. And that's because I'm going to tell you a little of that story right now, and I'm going to weave it into these non-financial factors. So let's begin. I'm Anne. My name is Anne, and I'm chronologically impaired. And I want to regard this room as my safe zone. We are all chronologically impaired in here. We all have a big, dark secret that we're sharing. By the way, anything you hear from this mouth stays in this room. This is anonymous, right? I'm kind of the poster child for, and why am I getting all this crackling? Because something's going on. But as he's fixing me up here, let me tell you about being a poster child. Okay, what's going on? He's just doing this because he wants to get his hands on me. I wish. Okay, I'm going to keep talking while he's doing this, or I'm going to run out of time. Okay, what is it about being a poster child? Well, I have a wonderful experience of actually starting my job with Alexander Forbes 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago exactly. But the point is that when Alexander Forbes hired me, I was already past my sell-by date. And we all know in this room what the sell-by date is, right? So I think it was quite exciting that Forbes would take this great leap forward and say, hey, research, wisdom, you're hired. 61, that was pretty exciting for me. But within 6 months, I became another kind of poster child for Alexander Forbes. I became the poster child for if anything can go wrong in your life, it will. So, 6 months in, having come out of a massively successful career in asset management, suddenly everything goes very, very pear-shaped. My husband dies. He doesn't just die, he dies and completely wipes us out financially. I lose pretty much everything, house, car, you name it. Children are at just that critical point where they've left home. So there you are, you're a family of one. And what do? Well, the first thing you do, you go to your financial advisor and you say, okay guys, what have I got left? And here's the news. Well, you know that company you used to own where you made sure that you didn't pay yourself very much because you really wanted to make sure that your employees got a lot, and besides, you had shares in the company, so that was your wealth? That influenced how much I saved for my pension fund. So my financial advisor at Forbes said, guess what? You can either retire right now because you're well-deserved retirement and you can live off of $13,000 a month. And now I'm renting a house, right? And my rental is more than $13,000 a month. Or we've got a wonderful projection tool here and you can safely retire, very comfortably retire at the age of 97. So which is it? Thank you, Alexander Forbes. This is my boss. I'm going to treat him really nicely today. The great thing about running research is you get the opportunity to look at issues like this. What does someone do? And there are 3 things I'm going to talk to you about today. One is adaptation. The human being is an incredibly adaptive entity, far more so than we think. So if you're listening to everything that people like Bruce and Laura and Jeff have to say and you think, oh my God, I'm just like Anne, I'm completely stuffed. The good news is we will be able to adapt, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later. The second thing is, guess what? Money isn't all that it's cracked up to be. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later too. And the third thing is that we now know so much more about the human brain than we ever did before, that those insights are really changing the whole conversation around things like retirement and things like crisis. So let's start with the bad news, crisis. What did we learn about the human brain in crisis? Well, if you think when you're in crisis that you sit down with a financial planner and have this wonderful intellectual discussion about your options, forget it. Because what Sendell Mullainathan at Harvard taught us in a fabulous book, go out and buy it, it's called Scarcity, is what actually happens to you when you're in crisis, and for some people, retiring is a crisis. For other people, retiring with $13,000 a month is a really big crisis. So what happens? And what happened for me in that session is I did exactly what's predicted. Your brain shuts down. You cannot even get one step ahead of the other. It's fascinating stuff, such that the ability to actually, you can do IQ tests of people under stress and actually see that shut down in process. What does that mean? That means that when we are engaging with people, if we don't understand what state of mind they're in, no matter how skillful that financial manager might be about the money side, if they're not also understanding what you're going through intellectually, that's another question. Which leads me to another point. And that is, for many people going through this, the shame that's associated with that crisis often means that what you say to your financial planner is a very different thing than the truth that you're experiencing. And what we learned is that if we don't start considering other ways in which people can form ways of talking about, am I still doing something terrible? He just wants to get his hands on me. Okay. I gotta get is it my hair? All right. No, I'm gonna keep with this. I'm gonna try it again. Okay, let me just keep talking as he keeps fiddling with my hair. What was I talking about? Memory. Peter talked to you about these clubs that we're trying to form. And I actually think that there's something in there. Because not a club in which a financial planner comes and tells you all the wonderful things you can do, but almost a club in which you can share all of these things that are disturbing the hell out of you right now, or that you're happy about, or your secrets to life. That's what these wonderful programs are all about, that bring people together. And that social interaction absolutely becomes critical at this point in your life. So this was another important insight that we got through our research. How your brain functions under crisis, and how interacting with other people who are sharing what you're going through becomes a critical way for you to get through it. Especially when you reach this age and you think you know it all. The last thing you want is some pipsqueak coming in who's 20 years old and telling you how to retire successfully. What's the second thing that we learned? I said that we learned that money wasn't everything. And John, maybe you can help me here with this slide. When John and I first started talking about what to talk about at this conference, John came up with this idea that maybe we ought to start talking about a hierarchy of retirement needs. And he was drawing from that old Maslow idea of the hierarchy of needs that human beings have, where you get basic needs and then safety and then belonging and up the equation. And I think the idea in his mind was that somehow the more money we would get, we would move up this ladder, and we'd get better and better and happier until we got to self-actualization. And so we looked into that. And what we discovered is something really quite astonishing. That in fact, moving up the money ladder does not really get you much better off than taking care of those first essential basic needs and safety. And once you've got that down, what happens after that has very little to do with money. And there was some really interesting research that we looked at. Let's try the next slide, John. This is a wonderful book called The Spirit Level by David Wilkinson and his assistant Kate Pickett. And what they discovered, this was simply a relationship between the income per head and life expectancy. You would think that the wealthier the country was globally, the higher the life expectancy. And to an extent that sort of works, up to a point. But then the fascinating thing is that it starts to plateau off. And no more additional wealth seemed to lead to greater life expectancy. But it gets even worse. So the next slide. What they also discovered is that once you moved up, again, up to a certain wealth, actually, it didn't even matter whether you were moving up the ladder of wealth. What was going on in countries was the issue was when you were looking at social problems, things like life expectancy, health and safety, infant mortality, teenage, pregnancies and births, trust, obesity, crime, all of these things, what they discovered is that it had nothing to do, the incidence of these in countries had nothing to do with the level of wealth in the country, but it had a lot to do with inequality of wealth in the country. So you take someone like USA, which is right up there, top of the pops with all these social problems, you would hardly call the US a poor country. And yet what has happened recently in the US is that you've got such a disparity of wealth between top and bottom that that itself has been the root of many social problems. Why does Scandinavia fare so incredibly well as a country with very few of these social problems? Oddly enough, because of the inequality issue. Now, South Africa is a country full of inequality. And the problem that you have in terms of this wealth factor is that if wealth becomes a motive for establishing a status, then wealth is used counterproductively. And this is one of the big problems that you face in here. But if wealth, on the other hand, and one of the great titles that I was reading about, a wonderful book that sort of said, if wealth doesn't buy you happiness, then you certainly don't know how to spend it. Or money doesn't buy you happiness, it's because you don't know how to spend it. So let's try this, John. One of the things that we're recognizing about wealth is not how much you have, but how you spend it. So if you're using wealth as a way to establish status, this is a very negative, problematic way of thinking of wealth. But if you're using wealth here and spending it wisely, what they decided was that there are about 8 different things you could do with money that actually increased your happiness level. And the first one was spend it on experience. That was the top of the pops. Don't go out and buy things, buy an experience in life. Spend it on other people. Spend it on regular and small luxuries, little tiny gifts that you give yourself. But this was the one that really stymied me, and I had a look at this. It said, delay purchases and enjoy the anticipation. And when I went into the paper and I was looking more about it, it said, there are 2 emotions that really drive us. It's reminiscences, and that reminiscence is incredibly important in our lives, but so is anticipation. They're kind of the Batman and Robin of emotions. So you know the old joke about old age is when you have more reminiscences and you have anticipations, and that's probably the most critical thing that you need to change. So how do you start getting something to anticipate at this point in your life? And that's where we move on to adaptation. And what adaptation tells you is 3 important things. If you have a passion, I have the most wonderful job in the country, in the world probably. I have a fantastic job. I'm absolutely passionate about that job. And it keeps me massively excited. But it means that I constantly have to plan for the future. I have to constantly have to think and anticipate what that team needs to do next to get to the next level. So I have built into my job that anticipation. So that's number 1. The second one is, remember I talked about that human brain? Well, there's a fantastic book. Go out and buy it. It's called The Secret Life of the Grown-Up Brain. And I promise you it's not about grown-up sex. The Secret Life of the Grown-Up Brain is about how much of the scientific research on the brain got it all wrong. They thought that our brain cells deteriorated as they aged. But they were studying people that were in nursing homes. They hadn't bothered to study people who actually were out and still very successful. And when they changed the dynamic to looking at that problem, what they discovered was that actually what was going on in the brain is something quite wonderful as you age. Good news. Now, I don't know where my car keys are right now, but what I do know what's going on in my brain is the myelin coating on my neurons is actually expanding. And it starts expanding or developing and producing after the age of 40 and onwards at a much higher rate. Now, what does that mean? That means that myelin coating on the neurons is allowing my left brain and my right brain to talk to each other more effectively. That concept of getting wiser when you get older actually has an explanation behind it. I know for a fact that my great value to the team is because I can think both left brain and right brain, and I have a much better sense of how to connect the dots. So you sit on a team of very, very effective individual technicians who are very good at straight-through processing and intellectual ideas. But I'm the one that knows how to connect those dots. And that's an enormously powerful thing to know about as you age. It also means that my life satisfaction also improves when you age. Another interesting insight. It's called the U-shape of happiness. Maybe we don't feel so stressed, maybe we know what's important, but it's important to keep that in mind. So secret life of the grown-up brain, keep it. How do you keep that brain functioning? That's point number 2. What do you think it takes to have your brain cells keep producing? By the way, they don't die off completely. They do keep reproducing. What do you think you have to do? It's not blueberries. It's actually exercise. And think about what new cells require. They require oxygen. So the more you exercise, the better. So that's point number 2. And the last point that I want to make, what did I talk about? Oh, you see, I can't even remember. So we talked about your brain not being able to function. And then the last point that really keeps your glue together is your social networks. Now, when I went into that crisis mode, the first thing that I did is in the basement of Alexander Forbes' offices, I drove my Mercedes 4x4 directly into a pillar, totaled the car, and destroyed pretty much the last item I had left in my life as an asset. More importantly, the week before, by not paying attention, in crisis, I'd lost my passport, I had a snatch and grab, lost my passport, my driver's license, and that meant I no longer had a car. I now couldn't get a driver's license because never mind, long, complicated story, and I had to walk to work, and I walked everywhere, and that walking saved my life, and so did that team, because it gave me the 2 things I needed. It gave me the oxygen, lots of it, but it gave me the opportunity to start carpooling with my teammates. And the minute I started carpooling, I started to get to know these people. And these people became my support system. So the last thing that keeps you going in life, and the thing you must start working on, is that social network. The reality is, money is involved. And the other thing I learned is if you have a whole bunch of really smart actuaries on your team, they'll help you through because they're about ready to tell you what the financial situation is. So I'm back to you, John.
Oh, great. Thanks,
to fill in those critical blanks. I'm going to sit down and listen to you in awe.
I think there's some great insights there. No, thanks. I think I think we can learn a lot because I think in the industry we often talk to people, you need to save more, you need to have the maxima. And yes, it can help. But I think there are lots of other things that you can do to have a more balanced view around these things. So really appreciate that, Anne. I think now that we've talked about that, I'd like to focus a little bit more around the financial factors and some of the things that you would be asking, taking some of those comments into account. The first thing is, how much do I actually need? And there have been quite a lot of international studies done on this. And up on the slide, we've got from international studies, 70 to 80% of the last salary you were getting at your company, if you're working, that would typically be what was desirable, up to 90% in some cases. Historically in South Africa, the industry's quoted figures of anywhere from 60 to 75%. But more research that we're seeing over the last 2 to 3 years are actually showing those figures are not applicable. And the reason for that is that people actually do spend more in retirement than you would expect. Costs do go up. Healthcare costs do go up. Yes, you get tax breaks, but I think a big impact that people have forgotten is those figures come from the defined benefit era. Do everybody here know what a defined benefit fund is? Well, some of you might know, but most people don't know anymore because they don't. 80% of funds in South Africa are what's called a defined contribution, where you contribute, you get investment returns, and one day when you retire, you've got to convert the capital into savings. A defined benefit fund gave you a pension for life, and you didn't have to worry from the company because people were living and staying with companies for longer periods. At the same time, companies were giving post-retirement medical aid benefits. These figures, the 60 to 75, was just for that basic income. Companies, in addition to that, were also giving post-retirement medical. But when many funds converted from defined benefit to defined contribution, we still continued using the 60 to 75% rule. It no longer applies. Most people need what you were spending before retirement is probably what you're going to need after retirement. The reality is that you're sometimes not able to do that. And that's where I think that Maslow's hierarchy can be very useful to prioritize your spending, to see what is important, what isn't, understand the psychology, as Anne points out, behind money, understand what's driving your desire to buy that new car, even though it's still working, and rather spend it on different smaller things and other things. Be smarter with the money, and you can actually see that maybe you don't need as much, and you can still be as happy. So how does the position actually look in South Africa? And this was a recent study done by Banks of Africa showing people that are in retirement, what pensions are they actually getting? And the figures are quite astounding. 4.4 million South Africans are aged 60 and over. 4.4 million. Of the 4.4 million, only 740,000 are getting a pension that they saved for, meaning the balance are either working or they're on a state old age pension. And the vast majority would be on a state old age pension. That pension is 1,350 Rand a month. So most pensioners in South Africa are only getting 1,350. The lucky few that did actually plan, in some cases 30, 40 years, on average they're only getting a 4,000 Rand pension, whereas the salary that they were earning before retirement is 12,500 Rand. That is a massive drop, and it ties up with the figures that Bruce was showing around your salary before retirement, your pension, on average, is a 30%. So if you was earning 100 Rand, the next day when you retire, you're now earning 30 Rand. And the reason for that is poor preparation, insufficient contributions, all the factors that Bruce and the panel really went through. But I just want to cover briefly two factors that I want to leave with you that you do need to be looking if you're planning for retirement that drive making good preparation. The first one is longevity. People are living longer. I'm an actuary, and I've actually do see pensioner data, and we do valuations on the old defined benefit funds, and it's astounding to see, 15 years ago when I started, very few people actually reached the age of 100. But how many South Africans are actually reaching 100? It's quite astounding.
Me.
And Bruce is planning to retire at 102. It's probably not that unrealistic because people are definitely living a lot longer. So where did this concept of retirement actually come from? 130 years ago, von Bismarck woke up one day and decided he's going to create a concept of retirement age, and it was 65. That's 130 years ago. The reason he did that was that we were going through the Industrial Revolution that just started, and it would be inhumane for the jobs at that time for people beyond 65 to continue working. So the reason was sound. It was to be humane. We provide for social security. The reality is that when people hit 65 130 years ago, on average, they only lived for 2 years. How many people are living beyond 65? How many people in the audience here are over 65 or close to that? Probably quite a lot. 65 is quite young these days. People are now living way beyond that. And today, South Africans, once you reach 65, on average, between you and your spouse, there's a 50% likelihood that one of you will get to 90. And then when my son retires one day, after he's spent all my pension and done all those things, between him and his spouse, the probability, if things continue like this, will be 85% that one of the two of them will still be alive at 90. It's quite astounding. So retirement was really seen as something that was absolutely necessary, and then moved into something that's seen as like a leisurely activity, and people are living longer. But people aren't planning sufficiently for that, and that's showing into the statistics. So one thing I would leave with you is, please have a look at that. Make sure that you've made sufficient provision for these things. The other thing is, like, you will be faced with a decision of, what do I do with all this capital? You know, the 5 million rand, 10, and if you're really lucky, the 30 million rand sounds like a lot, but what must I do with it? And the way we like to look at things is, again, you must focus on your objective. You must look at the Maslow's hierarchy, prioritize, understand the psychology behind things, work out your budget, but then you need to decide on your objective. And at the end of the day, what we don't want is on the slide over here, the top line. It's where Joe's pension is varying from month to month. 1 month he gets 100 rand, the next month it's 90 rand, then who of you in retirement would be happy with that kind of arrangement? So volatility of income you don't want. Also what you don't want, and we often see this, is when people start off thinking they've got sufficient, but as they go into retirement, they realize more and more, because of inflation, medical costs, because maybe they started off with a drawdown rate that was too high, they don't have sufficient. And that's exactly the point when they are not able to make, do various things to make up for that shortfall. So they fooled into thinking at the beginning, I've got enough, but yes, my drawdown rate is very high, but I'll worry about that later. The reality is, because you're living longer, generally, it will happen, and you will see the impact of those things. What do we want? Ideally, what you want, once you've gone through all your dreams, aspirations, and what's realistic, etc., you want stability of income. That's the major thing. You want an income for life, and you want to maintain the standard of living you've now prioritized and decided on. You'll be faced with two broad decisions. Do I take this capital and select what's called a life annuity, where an insurance company pays out a pension for life? And there are various options over there. You can choose how much to provide for your spouse, guarantees, and various escalations, should it be increasing with inflation or some other measure. I'm just going to illustrate here some of the things you need to consider. If you take Vusi, in my example here, he's got 1 million rand, and he decides he wants to have this life annuity for life, because it's secured, gives stability, etc. In 2007, he would get a pension of 3,700 rand. Today, he would only get, for that same 1 million rand, 3,200 rand. It was a 20% drop, because interest rates have come down, because they've been kept quite low globally, because post the financial crisis, to keep the stimulus going in the economy. But what has happened? The cost of retirement has gone up for Vusi. Also, have a look at what happened in 2009. Between 1 month and the next month, if he decided to purchase an annuity from 1 month to the next, look at the volatility. At one point, it was almost a 3,200 rand. If he made the decision at that point, he's locked into that low pension. So the reality is, with these kinds of products, you need to be aware that the quotes vary month to month. You may need to phase it in to smooth some of those things. And be aware that today, you need more, because interest rates are actually lower. The other major product that one can go into, and 80% of people at retirement take this, is a living annuity. A living annuity is essentially a capital sum. They take your 1 million rand, and you can then draw it like a savings account. It's invested, but when it's finished, it's finished. And 80% of South Africans, for various reasons, actually take this. But I'd like to just point out 3 things you need to bear in mind with these living annuities. The first one is inappropriate investment strategy. It's very important that the way you invest that lump sum, you think about it very carefully, that it balances all the objectives. It's not always about maximizing income. It is about having a sustainable income, not about maximum return. It's a very different thing. So here's some research that we worked out. For every rand of pension you get in retirement, 23 cents comes from what you saved when you were working. 36 cents comes from the returns up to when you retired. 41 cents are the returns after retirement, because that is when the capital is at its greatest. So the decision of investing that money is extremely important. But remember, it's not about maximizing return, it's about having the greatest stability of income and maximizing that. The second thing is emotional switching. Anne talked about the psychology, the brain, and we'll speak a little bit later about investment markets. But the one thing I want to leave with you is, this is what happens when the markets go up and down. When the markets go up, and you all would have maybe experienced this, we get optimism, excitement, thrill, and then at some point you're at a buy, and everybody's now a financial expert. This stock's doing well, that stock, red flags. That's the point of maximum financial risk. People tend to then they pile in to that because they believe everything's going well. Shortly after that, the market crashes. And then you have anxiety, denial, fear, desperation, panic. And eventually, what do people do? They pull out and they put their money in cash. And in some countries, people have actually put their money under the mattress for years and years. The problem with this particular thing is people invest at high, take out low, lose massive. And we have seen these things happen. An example I'll leave with you is that we had somebody in PE telling us they know someone in 1998, 1999, when the tech bubble was happening. All the tech stocks were doing well, etc. And then the market crashed. This guy took all his retirement savings out, and still to today has not gone back into the market. Do you know what a massive amount of returns he's lost over there? And then the last thing is drawdown rates too high. Make sure that you don't draw too much of your living annuity. It needs to sustain you for a 20 to a 30-year period. So I think to close off, I hope that's given you a good overview of some of the issues.